What happened to you there?" He nodded. Then he began to talk, and to pace the room again, but at least he wasn't armed.
It started out the same. The dream. We got hit, and I made it to a trench, like I always do. But this time I wasn't alone.
"Are you talking about Matt?" I asked. We had gotten that far in the dream before.
He was there with me, yeah. Just the two of us. We got separated from our unit.
Matt was a buddy of his I'd heard about. They had worked on the same munitions truck, but I didn't know too much more than that.
He was ruined, man. Both his legs like hamburgers, shredded to shit. I had to drag him by his arms. It was all I could do.
He stared at me for help. "Anthony, are you talking about your dream or what really happened that night?" Now his voice went down to a whisper.
That's the thing, Doc. I think I'm talking about both. Matt was screaming like he was some kind of wild herd animal. And when I heard the screaming in the dream, it was like I knew I'd heard it before.
"Were you able to help him?" I asked.
Not really, no. I couldn't help, couldn't do anything at all. A medic couldn't have helped Matt the condition he was in.
Okay, so what happened next?
Matt starts saying, "I'm not gonna make it, not gonna make it," over and over like that. And this whole time there's fire coming from every direction. I don't know if it's our guys or the ragheads. There's nowhere the two of us can go. Not with him on those shot-up legs and losing his insides like he was. And then he starts saying, "Kill me. Do it, please."
I could see that Anthony was into it now. The dream. The horror of what had happened that night in the war. I let him keep going.
He takes out his own gun, but he can barely even hold it. He's crying 'cause he can't do it, and I'm crying 'cause I don't want him to. And mortars are going off everywhere. The sky's lit up like the 4th of July.
Anthony shook his head, stopped talking. His eyes were welling up with tears. I thought I understood. There were no words he could use to describe this. "Anthony, did you help Matt kill himself?" A tear rolled all the way down his cheek.
I put my hand over Matthew's, and I shut my eyes. Then we fired. Together.
Anthony stared at me.
You believe me, don't you, Dr. Cross?
I should, shouldn't I?
I don't know.
There was anger in his eyes.
You're the doctor. You should know the difference between bad dreams and reality. You do, don't you?
Chapter 91. In our very strange and strangely powerful session together, Anthony DeMeo had asked me if I was a cop, and it struck me now that I hadn't answered him. I wasn't quite sure myself these days. I was still settling back in with Metro, and my situation was a special one. I knew one thing for sure. I hadn't ever worked any harder on a case, one that seemed more complex and difficult every day. Frustrating to all of us, but not that unusual under the circumstances, our hands were tied in the investigation of Brian Kitzmiller's death. The cyber unit at the Bureau had promised a new contact soon and a full report on everything Kitz had been doing before he died, but in the meantime it was basically, "We'll get back to you." Which is why Sampson and I showed up on Beth Kitzmiller's doorstep in Silver Spring, Maryland, a day later. We didn't want to bother the family, to intrude on their grief, but we didn't have much choice. "Thanks for letting us come over," I said as Beth let the two of us into the foyer of the house. Her face was drawn, and she looked deeply tired, but there was strength and resolve in her voice.
"Brian died looking for this terrible, terrible man. You do whatever you need to do. Stay here as long as you have to. We need closure, Alex. I need it. So do my kids."
6-year-old Emily hovered at the top of the stairs, wide-eyed and silent, watching us. I gave her a wink and a quick smile, and finally she smiled back. Brave little girl, but just seeing her put a pain in my heart. I needed closure, too. We were hoping to take a look in his office, I told Beth. I know he did a lot of work at home. And if anyone had crossed paths with our killer online, it would have been Kit's, I thought, though I didn't say that part out loud. Of course. Let me show you the lair. Beth led us through a pair of sliding pocket doors at the rear of the homey colonial that Kit's would never see again. His office looked out onto a backyard with a swing set and a sunflower garden. Life goes on. For some of us, anyway. Not for Kit's, though. Beth lingered in the doorway. I don't know if you'll find anything worthwhile or not, but please, look anywhere you like. Nothing in our house is off limits. Is this the only computer he used at home? Samson asked, from where he sat at a large, cluttered desk. I noted that the system was surprisingly low-tech, just a Dell CPU and monitor. He had a laptop from the bureau, Beth said. I don't think it's here, though. I haven't come across it anywhere. I looked over at Samson. We hadn't found a laptop in Kit's office or his car. How about passwords? Any idea? I asked Beth. She blew out a mouthful of air. This was difficult, but Beth Kitzmiller was making it a lot easier for us. Try Gummy Worm with an I. He used that one sometimes. The three of us exchanged a kind of shy, painful smile. It was his nickname for Emily, she offered, and occasionally for me. Samson tapped in Gummy Worm. Chapter 92. It was Kit's password, at least on the computer at home, and while Samson feverishly worked the keyboard, I started in on the desk drawers. I turned up a thick stack of pending case files, most of them serial-related, and all filled with Xeroxes of original material. I had to wonder if these were unauthorized copies he'd brought home from work. Kit's had been a fan of this kind of stuff, right? If he was a little obsessed, it was part of what made him good at his job. Of course, in the back of my mind, I couldn't help thinking Kit's was FBI, and Kyle Craig had been, too. Unfortunately, that particular line of thinking also made me a suspect. The first case I looked at was one I'd heard about before. Someone was breaking into suburban Maryland homes at night and strangling women in their beds. No theft, no vandalism, just the vicious murders themselves. So far, there had been 3 in a span of 5 months, 1 every 7 weeks. The next file was coded Mapmaker, and outlined a series of shootings, always with the same gun. The victims were apparently random, the only consistency being their location. The shootings, 4 so far, had taken place on street corners along a straight line running through northwest D.C. Then I discovered a file Kit's had put together on Kyle Craig. It even included information on how I had taken Kyle down. Plus, Kit's had been going through all of Kyle's old case notes, including the ongoing investigations at the time he was arrested. When I found the DCAK file, it was mostly old information on the Washington area murders. Copies of crime reports, map sections, lab results, interviews, hundreds of them, all tied to the known homicides. Not much that was new or helpful, and nothing directly linking DCAK to Craig. "How's it going over there?" I asked Samson. "Any luck so far? Good or bad?" "There's a lot to look at," he said. "He's got Technorati, blog decks, PubSub, tracking software, Alex. With the right setup, he could ping anyone who commented on a blog or surfed a site." "So how do we find out what Kit's knew? Where did he keep it?" Samson thrummed his fingers on the desk. "I could check his internet history, see if there were sites he went to a lot. Guess I'll start there." A few minutes later, Samson suddenly sat back in Kit's desk chair. He whistled through his teeth. I'll be damned. Come over here, Alex. I peered over his shoulder. Look familiar? Sampson asked. It should. He'd pulled up a long list of sites, many of them with names I recognized from my own surf sleuthing. But that's not what had my attention now. In addition to the named sites, the list included dozens of numbers. As I looked closer, I saw that it was actually the same number, repeated over and over, subdivided in different ways with periods and slashes.
344.19.204.411 34.41.920.441/1 34.419.20.44/11 344.192.04.411.
The list continued beyond the figures on the screen, but what we had was our mystery number, the one from the side of the mailbag at the Smithsonian. It's an IP address, Alex. A website. At least Kits seemed to think so. Why didn't he tell us about it? I asked. What's going on here, Sampson? Maybe he hadn't found the right combination. Maybe he hadn't gotten around to checking it yet, or the site could be inactive. One way to find out, I said. Let's start at the top and work our way down the list. Chapter 93. Bree Stone stood all alone on the roof of the 19th Street house, staring at the spot where the sun had baked Brian Kitzmiller's blood to a cracked black stain. All the wrong questions were running through her head. Did you suffer much, Kitz? Were you blindsided? Did you even have a fighting chance? Any chance at all? Did you know who did this? They were inevitable questions, human ones, but also unhelpful to this investigation. She needed to focus on the killer's methods, and then trace any evidence he might have left here. Tonight, Biotech was coming in to clean the yellow house. The homeowners would be back in town tomorrow. This was the last walkthrough, her final chance to find some shred of evidence that everyday life would soon erase. Every indication was that the killer had come up through the roof hatch and had exited by the scaffold in the back, 2 houses over. Kitz's post-mortem had shown abrasions under the arms and fibers on his shirt where he'd been hauled up with a strong nylon rope, or a cord of some kind. Non-fatal levels of chloral hydrate were in his bloodstream, indicating he'd been unconscious, which was the only good news so far. No blood was found inside the house, at least none that mattered. Kitz's throat had been cut right here on the roof, not long before the police arrived. The killer probably could have timed it any way he wanted. The bastard chose the close call, didn't he? He planned everything about this, including that Kitz should die soon after we arrived. Bree pressed her knuckles into the back of her neck. The pulsing headache she'd woken up with was turning into an all-day event, and the dark shirt she was wearing was a really bad call. It was already soaked through with sweat. She walked toward the scaffold, past a litter of cigarette butts and half-crushed tall boys that hadn't been there before, which meant that somebody had been. Psycho-tourists, Alex liked to call them, pathetic creeps drawn by a serial crime scene. And hell, this was probably the most sensational case in the last 10 years, unfortunately for everyone involved. Bree looked straight down from the roof. The parking area below was mostly empty at this time of day. That's where Kitz's white Camry had been found in one of the resident spaces. The killer either left on foot or had another vehicle waiting for him. That is, if he left the scene at all. Had he? Or had he stayed a while to watch and collect memories? Did he always hang around afterward? The actual murder had taken place in private, an interesting departure for DCAK. The audience was bigger, but also more abstract, out there in TV land somewhere. Bree wondered if he'd needed, to check out the live crowd